Welcome. Don't adjust your dial. Lofi Poli Sci podcast coming at you. Michael Pickering here with our good friend Gregory Day, a writer, director, bookseller, and the voice behind HipsvilleAD, the fanatical sect of God of subcultures and fervent ramblings of all breed of cinematic pleasures. How are we doing today, Gregory Day?
I'm doing fantastic, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, doing great. And what top 10 movie list do you have for us today? And explain it to all our Lo-Fi listeners out there, if you would.
Yeah, let's get going, man. We're back in the saddle here. We're going to be talking 10 extreme films, top 10 must-see extreme films.
Ooh, extreme films. And what exactly is an extreme film for you?
Yeah, we're talking about movies that are either visually extreme or content-wise extreme, so the violence or the subject matter, stuff that's maybe taboo subjects or stuff that is just on the far end of cinematic taste that people pass out during or they throw up in, or reportedly, some of these movies aren't that bad, but yeah, movies that are like the heavy metal of cinema, just abrasive, often sick films.
Yeah, I like this because for a lot of people, every so often, you all got that one friend of yours out there that they're like, hey, let's watch this movie. And they pop in a movie and it's so fucking crazy. And you're like, why didn't you warn me about that movie? Because they just play you like that. But if you listen to this top 10 list today, you'll know ahead of time which 10 films to watch out for. All right, let's go ahead and jump into it then. What do we have coming in at number 10?
Yeah, number 10 is a film called Boxer's Omen from 1983. It's a Shaw Brothers kung fu horror flick, obviously made in Hong Kong. This is a film that's a little more of the extreme end of violence and visual flair. It's not really all that taboo breaking, but it is a very slimy, schlocky kung fu film about a boxer whose brother gets injured, and he's going to go to Thailand to train so he could beat the guy who beat his brother. And then he gets kind of wrapped up in this weird underworld spiritual journey where he's got to fight this sort of witch doctor, and everything the witch doctor is going to throw at him are these wild, goopy things, alligator heads that are floating, come flying at him, and there's a lot of body mutilation, all this sort of stuff. It's a great blend of horror and kung fu. There's not a lot of those films. But in the 80s, the Shaw Brothers were starting to crank out these really weird, and I can't stress enough, slimy movies. A lot of things dripping here, but this one's a lot of fun. And even though there's a lot of like blood and guts and stuff, yeah, I can't recommend this one enough if you want to have a good time.
Okay, man. A few things about this trailer, and firstly, no, I haven't seen this movie, and all the movies on this list I haven't seen. You got some great picks though. But firstly, when this thing started, I had no clue what the hell this movie was all about. And I was just like, alligator heads popping around. I was like, and you're right, the slimy and gooey. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who wants to check it out. But then all the mask and the weird shit going on. But then it started mirroring some very familiar tones to me that you see in a lot of anime focused on demons or focused in feudal Japan era. And then when I took it in that frame, it kind of started to make sense to me. But then I looked at the year this movie came out, 1983, and I couldn't help but wonder if this film helped inspire a lot of animes from the 90s and early 2000s and their take on dealing with like ancient demons and kung fu and different martial arts and things like that. Anything to that?
Maybe, but I think maybe just more cultural references that are going on in the film. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking for extreme Asian horror, there's a lot that we could talk about. But I think kind of going back, this is one of the staples of that genre.
Definitely. It definitely piques my interest for sure. All right, what do we have for number 9?
Yeah, number 9, we're going into a very dark territory immediately here with a film from 1975 called Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom. This is a very famous film. It's an art house film. It's a well-respected film. But I put it on this list because it is rather gross and dark. It is about the dying days of the Italian fascist party, and they take these kids up to this mansion and they torture them for 120 days, putting them through all manner of sick things as sexual assaults and making them eat feces and just a bunch of really awful things. But it's based on a Marquis de Sade book that the director Pasolini adapted this to illustrate what the fascists were doing and why they were, or how desperate they were to cling to power in the end of their rule in Italy. And Pasolini was one of the most controversial filmmakers of his day. He died right after this film. He was murdered. I don't think it had anything to do with this film, but it kind of really illustrates what it was like being a gay man in Italy during this time. And the subject matters that he tackled, kind of breaking these taboos and specifically calling out the ruling class of his childhood, really, in Italy. So this is a really great film. I would recommend for anyone who wants to watch a film that is historically important, but also kind of get to know those darker, grosser, side of cinema.
Hearing you talk about it really puts it into perspective for me, because before all I had was just the trailer. And in many ways, the trailer didn't tell you a whole lot about the film, except for it most certainly told you that the film was going to deal with different things of sexual nature. But it most certainly didn't put it in the frame of, dealing with fascist Italy and some of the horrible things that that government actually did. But I most certainly did think about, and as you mentioned, I wondered, this film coming out in 1975, did it really create a big ruckus in Italy when it came out? I mean, I would imagine that it would have, huh?
Oh, well, 100%. Yeah, this is a film that was, yeah, everyone kind of hated it, and I can't really say if it grew over time, but I think it made a huge impact when it came out. But this was, and like a lot of these films on this list, like when an extreme film comes out and it affects a lot of people, people get upset about it, and Pasolini was definitely had a target on his back because of what he was saying. This is not the first film he's made where he criticized Italian society. He had a lot of other films where he criticized the church, but this one was the one where I think it went too far for some people.
No, I think all of what you said is extremely important. And to put it into a little more of a context for listeners, although we're saying like this film came out in 1975, for a lot of people, especially younger generations, even our own generation, we think 1975, we think, oh, that's like hippies and then maybe some disco and a free loving world and everything was just about freedom and you could do whatever you want. And in 1975, that isn't necessarily the case. In 1975, you still had vast majority of the populations across the globe who were set in their old ways of the 1960s, the 1950s, even back to the 1940s. In 1975, people were still trying to break the taboos and especially break the conversation about being able to talk about more difficult subject matter like this, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. The '70s, I think, especially cinematically, um, has a lot of points of breaking those taboos. Like you're thinking about films, not to get too off topic, but like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, uh, things like
Right.
that, where it was just like violence. And don't forget, Vietnam was still happening at this time. It was still on TV. People were still seeing all these things. The riots and things were still pretty fresh from 1968 and '69 in people's minds. So still very tumultuous time around the globe. And to be talking about like the idea of making a film about Italian leadership torturing people, it was only 30 years before this movie came out that this stuff was happening. So it was still pretty fresh in the minds of the Italians. It had to be. I mean, Pasolini, 30 years earlier, had to be living under that, that society, and in a lot of ways, those people still existed in society. They didn't like just all disappear. So yeah, I mean, this is a film I would highly recommend, both politically and this would have gone really well on our political list. Um,
Right,
yeah,
right.
this is one of those great, real great works of art.
Excellent, man. Excellent. All right, what we got coming up next at number eight?
Yeah, number eight, also great work of art, but it maybe in a different kind of way, is Pink Flamingos from 1972, directed by the great John Waters. Pink Flamingos, for anyone who isn't aware of what it is a film about a few people who are battling to be the filthiest people on Earth. Um, Ranging from doing all manner of things like licking everything in someone's house to eating raw meat, and things just keep escalating and escalating, and it ends with a very famous scene of the Star Divine eating dog feces on camera. It was a real thing. They didn't. There's no props or special effects there, and that's what really shot John Waters and Pink Flamingos into the stratosphere of art house cinema and genre cinema. But to kind of elaborate on that, what I mean by that is John Waters took all the genre B movie stuff of the 60s and the 50s and really made art films kind of poking fun at them or the garishness of them. And so this film is the one where it just hit American audiences blow the belt and really showed how filthy and dirty that part of our society is.
And once again, going back to the conversation about breaking taboos, and especially the taboo of there are certain things you don't talk about. There are certain things you don't make movies about. And
Mhm.
it's the idea that you're ignoring a part of society that truly does exist. Have we had this movie on a list before or not?
We have not. We did talk about Female Trouble previously, which is by John Waters and also starred Divine in the lead.
That's what it is. I was like, when you say the name Divine and I saw the character in the trailer, I was like, this is calling something familiar to me.
Mhm.
Okay, so I was right. We have talked. So is this like an accompanying piece? Is it the same person and the same backstory, Divine, in both films? Are they like a combined universe or no?
No, no. So Divine is her persona outside the film. So in the film, Divine plays actual characters. Um, but no, there. I think Female Trouble came after this one, so this one came out first,
Okay.
and then Female Trouble followed it. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this movie is really kind of coming at American society and just pushing you into as an audience member, pushing you to see how far can the characters go? How far are you willing to follow these people? How much can you take? I guess is really the point of the film. It's hilarious, but yeah, it's really unlike Female Trouble, which is much more of a character study and much more of a comedy. Pink Flamingos is just like how far can we take this? How far can we push polite society in watching this?
Interesting, interesting. And so I want to tell you my take on the trailer first, but then I want to make a comparison to what you just said the movie was about to another series of movies, and that also has a new one coming out actually. But I will say when I
Hmm.
started watching this trailer, and you're following Divine, and the music is playing, and just following Divine, and Divine's just walking and walking, and it's just the music. And like a minute 30, I'm looking at my watch, which I don't have a watch, but I was like, how long are we gonna watch Divine walk? Um,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
it's towards the end of the trailer, and you're like, well, what's gonna happen now? Like it's just over. And then suddenly Divine walks into the front yard of some house and just drops trow and uses the bathroom on the front lawn and then walks away and the trailer ends. And I'm like, what the fuck is this movie about? Like it and so that leads me to my question. And it's kind of like that with most of these trailers. When I think about a trailer today, in studios, they make trailers, generally speaking, to tell audience what the movie is about. And so many trailers today, you could say that in many respects, they're spoilers to the film. I mean, they tell you too much to make sure they get your attention to go watch it. But a lot of these trailers from back in the day in Pink Flamingo 1972, they leave you with a lot of question marks about what the film actually focuses on. Is that just unique to these films because of their style, or was that more of an industry regularity at the time? Do you know?
So two things. One, I would say that if you go back and watch a lot of old trailers from the 70s, they were like 3, 4, 5 minutes long. They gave away a ton. So I don't really think trailers have changed much because I think trailers are created by business people, not by artists. So they're
Okay.
basically trying to sell you a product, not necessarily show you a cool snippet of the film. Secondly, uh, I had a hard time finding a good sample for this film to send you because the actual trailer for Pink Flamingos is genius. It's just interviews with people coming out of the theater who had just watched Pink Flamingos.
Oh wow.
Yes, people with beehive hairdos, people, you'll see these people who are just, they look like they're straight out of the 60s, um, who are just telling someone with a microphone exactly what they thought, how wild the movie was. Um, and there's actually no footage of the actual film in the original trailer for Pink Flamingo. So that's why I hesitate to send it to you, because
Wow.
it would give you no context to the movie. But that to me is a great marketing ploy, because everyone wants to know, like, what did you see? What are, these great reactions? I got to see this film, and that's a great marketing tool right there.
I like that. That is a pretty genius marketing tool for cutting a trailer together to make people want to go see the film.
Mm-hmm,
All right,
mm-hmm.
now I'm going to do like my little comparison. So what you said about Pink Flamingos and Divine, the filthiest person alive, pushing the envelope about how much audiences will tolerate. That directly makes me think of the Jackass franchise.
Oh yeah.
All right, and they even have a new Jackass that just came out or is going to come out. I don't know which one because I haven't been following it. But
Mm-hmm.
how would you compare those two different franchises or films?
That's a good question. I think there is a lot of similarities in things that they do, as far as like Jackass doing things that are stomach turning. I think they have a different aim though. One is to show, I think maybe sometimes to test how much the performers will go in Jackass, um, which to us is, in a way like, oh, how much can these people take? Whereas in Pink Flamingos, I think it's more coming for your parents' generation of stuck up conservatives, people with plastic on their furniture, that sort of stuff. These kind of calling out these um, cultural, garishnesses or something like that, to where it's just kind of really has an aim to get at people. Where I think it is funny, but I think more so it's trying to say something. Whereas I think Jackass is definitely, the cousin of something like this, but I think more so they're aiming to try to make you laugh.
Got you, got you. Yeah, I just listening to you, it just made me think about that comparison because to me, like Jackass in many ways does challenge you. Yeah, like for sure, it's a challenge to see what the actual participants in the movie will put themselves through. For instance, how much of a jackass are they? But it's also the challenge for us as an audience. How much are we willing to watch?
Right.
And I think it's great that you have a film like Pink Flamingo that goes all the way back to 1972 that's pushing people to challenge them to say, how much are you willing to accept about not just what the film is willing to show you, but about the reality of our society that we live in?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all know they got dirty people out there, for sure. All right, man. Excellent choice. Excellent choice. Where are we going? Number 7, is that right?
Yeah, number 7 is a film from Germany called Angst from 1983. This is one of the more violent films on this list. It is based on a real life serial killer in Germany who murdered several people in a home after he was released from an institute. But the film is sort of a play-by-play of this guy getting out of an institute and breaking into this home and then murdering the people in it. Um, which there's a ton of serial killer films, but what makes this film so unique is that the way it is shot, and I forget the name of the technique, but basically it's attaching the camera to the actor who's playing the serial killer, and so you're following him throughout this film, like constantly attached to this actor, and you're seeing all of the rage and the his cold bloodedness coming through him, and there's nowhere for you to go as an audience member. There's no cutting away from things. It's just so abrasive, and you can't go anywhere. And it's just it's a wonderfully great technique to show this, and it's really shot really well. But it's a film that it's just hard to stomach as you're watching this guy sort of meticulously murder this family in this house. I will say that if you watch this film, there is a little disclaimer at the beginning of the movie. Now I don't know if it came out this way, but nowadays it tells you you're about to watch a movie of extreme violence, so be forewarned. But if you can stomach that sort of thing, it is rewarding as watching a film about this part of our society, and this type of person and what drives them to do these kinds of things.
And as a side note to that extent, I would say, a complete scaredy cat when it comes to horror and scary movies. For sure, I watched these trailers with all the lights on, wrapped up in a blanket, not on full screen, with only one earpiece in on the sound. And I'll proudly say that, you know.
Hmm.
But you know, it when I started this trailer, it just started going and going. And at first, I was just like, "Why make this film?" That was like one of the first things that came
Hmm.
about. But then, because I mean, it was crazy as hell. Like you said, that disclaimer on it, I think it's well warranted just from looking at the trailer. I could only imagine what the full film would be. But what do you, and I do want you to answer this in a second, but I want to finish though. You know, what do you think goes through a filmmaker's head that decides to make a film or to take on a project like this that involves such extreme violence? Because I mean, at first, I just thought this was craziness and I didn't, you know, I thought it was a work of fantasy. But then I see that it is based on a true story. And, you know, that completely changed my perspective on how I took in the trailer in itself. So I do want to hear, and to go back to you though, why do you think someone makes a film like this?
Yeah, I think I think there's, I mean, right now there's a huge boom of interest in true crime, especially in the podcast world. But I think that stems even further back to, Unsolved Mysteries and the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, and then
I forgot
other
about that show existed.
but other other staples of kind of media trying to understand these things. And I think making a movie about someone or writing a book about someone that you can really dig in and try to understand where they came from, or explore their urges or this animalistic nature of someone who lacks a lot of humanity. Yeah, I think there's a lot to say, or a lot that can be experienced both watching the film and making something, and trying to get to the heart of what makes someone do these things. They are human, yet they do these awful things, and that's a part of ourselves that we need to explore. So in a film like this, or a film, I didn't put it on here because I didn't think it was as extreme as some of these other ones, but I think it's an excellent film called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. um they're great films that explore the humanity of these people, not that they deserve your sympathy, but just in a way to try to understand these dark parts of our own humanity.
I think that's an excellent way to put it. The fact that we do have to deal with the reality that some individuals throughout the world do act in a very distinctly, as you may say, you know, inhumane way, even though they're human beings. But you might say that, you know, oh, that person's just not a human. Well, I mean, they are a human. They just do things that we do not necessarily deem as human-like. So to approach the subject of what makes some people tick and to do these kinds of things is incredibly important for us to ask as a society. And I think representing in art and representing it in a film, a full feature length film where you can really present a good chunk of material to an audience and say, here, what do you think of this? Even though in 1983, when this came out, do you think this created any stirs as far as the extreme violence in it?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think we have a sensibility of the 80s that it was all fun, and it was, ET movies and Pee-wee Herman. But I think when you think about how conservative the 80s really were, the Reagan era, the Margaret Thatcher era, when these films came out, they were really coming, to break through those taboos. And yeah, I mean, I think seeing a film like this, even today, if this film came out today and the way it's shot, the way that it's so immersive for the audience, I think it'd still shock people.
Yeah, and so I wanted to also ask something to that end. Do you think a movie like this gets a wide release today in US cinemas?
No, 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 no.
Yeah,
I think it gets an art house release, maybe plays your local, you know, art house, or if you have one. But it would probably do much better on a streaming platform.
got you, got you. Yeah, you know, I was just curious and I thought about that. All right, well, what do we have for number six?
All right, number six is a film from 2002 called Irreversible, from France. It's directed by the controversial filmmaker Gaspar Noé, who's done a lot of other great films, and I think this one is a great film. But of all the films on this list, this is the only one that I've seen on this list that I stopped watching in the middle of it,
Oh, wow, really?
to to regather myself. Um, so to talk about this film, there is a genre of B movies called the rape revenge film, which is typically a woman is raped and then she goes through this transformation where she becomes this stone cold killer and gets her revenge on the people um, who who assaulted her. So what this film is, and that's a genre from the 70s that really took off. But what this film is a rape revenge film told in reverse. So it's the revenge part. It's very similar to something like Memento, where each scene it's the end of the film first and kind of rolls back to the beginning of the story. It's the revenge first. You're seeing these um, two men searching the late night Paris for someone, and there's this just awful violence, and then you kind of see where it stems from as the scenes begin to roll back. And in the middle of the film, the really famous part of this movie is a rape scene that is incredibly graphic. It's like a 10-minute unbroken shot of this rape, which causes the subsequent violence that you already saw. And it's in how unrelenting that scene is that I had to actually stop and like take a moment before I finish the film. But the rest of after that, the rest of the film kind of it starts to go. It's going backwards in time, so everything after that is sort of like all of the setup of getting to what happened there. So it does get to a point of talking about how time changes everything, and now in the end you'll pass through time and everything is um eventually going to suck or you're going to die or whatever. But it's an extreme film, but it's beautifully constructed, and you can watch a lot of interviews with the actors and stuff, and they talk about how they did the scene and how it was completely safe on set and everything. It was stunt coordinated, but it is a terrible thing to watch, and I would say that it's an important film to see the nature of violence and how ugly some things are, because I think sometimes in these films that deal with assault, it kind of brushes over them or it's off screen or something. But this is a very nasty thing, but also talks about violence creating more violence, and then like your violence is going to create more violence, and that sort of um, cycle there. But yeah, this kind of goes back when we talked about the French extremity. This is definitely a film, if not one of the hallmark films of that genre movement. So yeah, I don't recommend this movie really to anyone who wants to watch an extreme film, but if you have the stomach for it and you want to watch it, it's out there.
No, I hear you. I hear you completely. And I did look this one up. I'll say normally I just watch the trailers. I don't look into movies, but one of the first things I saw on the trailer was that I recognized, being a French film, I recognized an actor and actress right away.
Hmm.
An
Hmm.
actress from the second Matrix, and then an actor from Ocean's 13. So I was like, oh, cool. These are both of them. We know them in US cinema only a little bit, but in French cinema, they're huge stars. So I
Oh
was like,
yes.
oh, I was like, let me see, if this is really like a big French film or whatnot. And then I caught a snippet of the plot and I was like, whoa. And it's, just like you explained. And I got to thinking, French cinema is always risque. The Nouvelle Vague, the new wave, always trying to push the envelope and push society to think about very difficult to talk about topics like this, and how violence begets more violence, and where we as society create that violence. And I couldn't help but think once again, and I don't think this film transported in the US gets released. Like, I don't see this film being put out in US cinemas, but depending on the streaming service, I really don't even see most US streaming services put this movie forward just because of the very nature of the topic of the film. And to me, that really speaks to the difference of French society versus US society, and the difference of what conversations different groups of people are willing to have or are not willing to have. But what do you think, since you know more about the film industry in the U.S. Do you think a movie like this with this topic and this kind of graphicness to it, do you think it comes out in the U.S.?
I think so. Yeah, I think
Really?
particularly if a film like this, so specifically this film and this director and his other films he's made, each of his films is very very tough. But I think because of its acclaim and its awards, or at least its nominations, this is a filmmaker who actually has a lot of notoriety, but also he is kind of critically acclaimed. Um, this film definitely came out here in the US. I don't know if it came out, I mean, so long ago, I don't know if it came out to wide release. I don't believe that, but most of his films do get at least a moderate release these days. His film Into the Void and Climax, most recently, got pretty big releases here. Um, but yeah, I think this is going to hit you. This When this movie came out, it probably played your art houses, probably more so than something like Angst would have done back in the 80s. Because the French extremity really took off here in the United States. There's a lot of films that came out because we're thinking about the time of Saw and all that stuff, and that the
Right,
popularity
right.
of that stuff was going on. So yeah, I think this film definitely would have been in the mix with that stuff. Even though this is not really a horror film, this is much more of an art house, um, genre adjacent film. But yeah, I mean, I think this film particularly got a lot of attention and released in the United States. And yeah, it does star Monica Bellucci, the actress, model, world famous face of cinema, as is the lead in this film. And just I think maybe based on that, she was in The Matrix, like you said, she was in a ton of stuff. That's a bankable star, even though the subject matter is really fucked up.
Yeah, it is. It really is. But once again, I think, cinema pushes us as a society to think about more things and to openly discuss things that in the past our parents were not willing to discuss, or didn't
Hmm.
teach us about, that the world, things existed, but just we didn't talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, a lot of these films are pushing that conversation forward, or many conversations forward, because all of these different films have completely different messages of their own. All right, well, where are we going next?
Yeah, number five, we're going back to Italy. We're going to the deep heart of exploitation cinema for the mainstay of the short-lived cannibal genre, and we're talking about Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. Cannibal Holocaust to me is always like a rite of passage for all the horror heads out there, to see one of the most extreme films ever made. Um, Watching it today, it's stomach turning, but not for the reasons I think the filmmakers set out to reasons they set out for. Because when you're watching the film, there's a lot of extreme violence in the film. There's also just a warning for anyone, a lot of animal cruelty in the film that was unregulated at the time the film was made. This movie came out in 1980, so they had the shot at the end of the 70s. Um, and that's what's really stomach turning to me as an adult rewatching the film. But it's one of the earliest found footage films about a crew of Europeans who go down to South America to find one of these lost tribes, and then they don't come back. And so the TV producer who sent them there travels down there to meet the tribe and to get the film cans back. And when he watches the footage, which is the bulk of the movie, we see that these Europeans have gone down there to exploit these tribes that are excluded from modern society and find out that they're cannibals. And it does have a commentary on Europeans and how they treat you know tribes and quote unquote uncivilized um, peoples, as from the Western European point of view. But it is, so it's in another way racist against these tribes, that they're going to eat you and everything. But what's so notorious about this film is how incredibly violent it is. And the filmmaker and the other members of the crew were arrested by the Italian government because they thought it was a snuff film upon seeing it. And they had to go to court and they had to explain how the special effects were made. And there's some really wonderful tidbits if you're interested in how special effects are done and how kills are orchestrated on screen, that they had to reveal. But if they didn't have to reveal that stuff, they had gotten away with some amazing movie making trickery to show some of these horrible violent acts without injuring people. But yeah, this is one of those films like when if you were young and you were in the horror and you were walking down the video aisle and you saw this box, this VHS box on the wall, you just knew like this was something that you had to have the stomach to get into. And yeah, and so it's for that reason I put it on this list. It's sort of a rite of passage horror film, um, from a genre that just does not exist anymore.
That's interesting because I wanted to ask you, because unlike the last film, I didn't look this one up. I just watched the trailer and consumed it. And right away, I had to wonder, is this also based on a true story or not? With the way that it was shot and it was framed in the actual trailer itself. And to hear that you said that after it came out that they actually had to go to court, just like reaffirms like to my question was, is the entire film shot like that? And it's so believable just watching the trailer, but watching the full movie that they had to go to court and prove to the government that no, this is fake. This is cinema. We did not really do this. Um, it really does say something about the effort that was put into making the film, and like you said, in the visual effects and things like that. And what I'll say about this one and a few of the other ones, overall, it really started pushing me to a larger question about these picks, which I want to wait to go in for just a little bit. I want to talk about some of your other choices as well. We'll come back to another question. So where are we going next? We're going to number 4, right?
Yeah, number four, we're coming to the US for one of the strangest movies ever made, Eraserhead from 1977, directed by the great artist David Lynch. This is a film that, yeah, it ranks among some of the strangest movies. If you look up a list of like weird movies or strange films or art films, just, oh, pardon my dog, wilding out there. Yeah, Eraserhead. It's a weird movie. It's definitely up to interpretation what's about, but it's about a timid young man who gets his girlfriend pregnant and they live in this really strange industrial world, and she has a baby that is just really abnormal. um doesn't look human at all, and it's sort of this weird, I wouldn't say sci-fi, but this surreal world of this man kind of coping with having this child who that never stops crying and it doesn't look human in his living space, and him dealing with it, and kind of the film kind of starts to drive him and really starts to drive the audience mad with all of its effects and stuff. But I think at the core of it, it's really about the anxiety of parenthood and dealing with what you're going to give to the world, what you're going to give to somebody else, what's inside of you. Are you going to pass it on to someone if you have a child? These sorts of things. But there's so much of the film that is up for debate, or for interpretation, I should say, as far as like what does Eraserhead mean. There is some scenes with that involves like pencil erasers and like him losing his head and all these things. But yeah, this is probably the most I would say interpretable film on this list, because there's not a definitive idea of what it's about. But David Lynch says that it is his most spiritual film, but it refuses to elaborate on that. But I think that has to do with the idea of you know expressing one's anxieties through a piece of art. But yeah, if you're looking for something that's just like from Mars, then I would definitely recommend Eraserhead.
After hearing you say all of that, that the meaning of the film is up for interpretation, I don't feel as bad about not knowing what this movie was about from the trailer. Like, I had no idea. I was like, it just a few different shots, but mostly following this guy, and I was like in Eraserhead. I was like, what does all this mean? But now hearing you talk about it and then thinking about the trailer again, I can see the idea of the anxiety of dealing with parenthood and the anxiety of dealing with having children, raising children, and everything that comes with it. So I think that's interesting. And I would say I did see that David Lynch directed it, and I know him from a lot of different projects, but I had no idea what Lynch was trying to do with this film. So I'm glad to see that no one really does.
Yeah, yeah. I will say, as all of the films on this list, this is the one that's most like an art piece. It's the most like if you were going to a museum and you looked at a painting, you wouldn't ask the painter to explain the painting, you would want to know, you would explore your own feelings and what you thought about it, how it makes you feel, and what you think is going on in that film. A lot of the other films in this list have plots, but this film, I think, it hits that artistic area where it's really about what you think about it, not really necessarily what is happening in the film.
Excellent, excellent. All right, and what is your choice for number 3?
Yeah, number 3 is a film that I have talked about before on this podcast. It's a film called Possession from 1981, a French-German collab here. I put it on the list because I can't deny that it's the most extreme emotional film I think I've ever seen. Just showing how bad a breakup can be, showing how life is in Cold War Germany, and just like getting to the heart of like how emotions tear you apart and how you can't handle them. This is the film. Like it's I don't think it gets any better than this when you're getting to expressing extreme emotions on screen. And I guess to recap it, I guess for previous audiences, it's about a breakup of this couple. The guy is a Cold War agent. You don't really know what he does. When he comes home, his wife is upset with him and reveals to him that she's having an affair. And once they split up, things get really dark and start to tailspin into horror, and everyone is having these emotional breakdowns. And it's sort of a portrait of a relationship that's divided in a city that's divided, because it does take place in Berlin of the 80s before the wall came down. And yeah, it's just a reflection of all these things, and how everything is falling apart in this area with these people, not only politically but down to the family.
I remember this being on the previous list, and for some reason, I felt like this wasn't the same trailer, or that maybe just having some time to step away from it, that it hit me, I'd say, in a much more direct way this time. Like, I'm not sure what I pulled from it. I remembered what the film was about, but
Mhm.
I definitively pulled something distinctly different from it this go around. And after it was done, I couldn't help but wonder if it wasn't perhaps because the movie trailers that were surrounding it in each particular list, like the movies that surrounded it in this list versus the movies that surrounded it in the previous list, and the difference of emotions that those two lists produced for me when I was exposed to the same trailer or the same movie. Was it a different trailer or was it the same trailer?
I don't remember. I think it was the same trailer. Um, yeah, I tried to find a good one because we just had a restoration last year, and so I tried to make sure to pull the trailer from the restoration so you can have the best quality uh, footage to review. But yeah, I mean, I think last time we were talking about introduction to international horror, and I think Possession definitely has a different vibe than the other horror films that I had accompanied with it, because a lot of those other films weren't as extreme, or they were more palatable. But yeah, I think in light of with the rest of these films, I think it sits. Maybe it's more sober than it comes off when it's surrounded by a bunch of other horror films.
Right, right. And it was just interesting to me. Um, Number one, how trailers are most certainly created to create a certain emotion inside the viewer, to make us as individuals feel a particular way about a film, to attract us to a film, to attract us about or to a certain subject that the artist is trying to discuss. But I just found it really interesting how, depending on where I was and what I was surrounded with, the trailer hit me in two kind of different ways. And I thought to
Mhm.
myself, framing effects, they're real. Like, I don't know, just something that was interesting I caught from it. All right, let's go ahead and hit your number 2 on the list.
Yeah, number 2 is also a film I've talked about before on this list, but it was much higher on a previous list, so I had to put it on here because it's undeniably one of the most adventurous films I've ever seen. Hausu from 1977 from Japan, just one of the absolute craziest movies you're ever going to see. It's a haunted house, witch movie about these schoolgirls who go to visit one of their aunts, and it turns out that this house is haunted by the spirit. And I think we touched on a few of the things previously here. There's this a cat in the house that may be the spirit, but there's a painting of the cat on the wall that's just spews blood. There's people turning into bananas. There's heads coming out of disembodied heads coming out of whales, out of a well, excuse me. It's just one of the most extreme horror films you could see, but in a very wholesome way, if I could say that without sounding contradictory. It's a lot of fun, and if you can cope with some of the extreme violence, it's almost cartoonish, the way it's depicted on screen. But this is just unlike anything you're going to see. It's like an acid trip Scooby-Doo episode, fun from top to bottom. But yeah, it's like a teenage Evil Dead kind of movie, if that makes any sense.
It does. If you've watched Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, and then
Yes.
Army of Darkness.
Yes.
And right away when I saw this on the list, I was like, yes, I remember this well. And then kind of made me smile. And then it kept rolling, and I was like, oh, the hella creepy stuff all over the place. And then like the hippie stuff, I was like, I had completely forgot there was like some hippity dippity kind of stuff in there.
Oh yeah.
And then just full craziness, ensues. But the effects, both practical and digital, because they had some early digital effects. Would you call them digital effects, or would you word them differently? How would you name it?
Ooh, that's a good one. I probably wouldn't call them digital for the 70s, although I could be very wrong. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely all kinds of strange effects in the film, probably overlaid art of some kind, probably some computer work in there. But there's also definitely like weird transitions of using like advertising signs, like billboards, and just all sorts of great cinematic trickery in this film.
Yeah, they were really pushing the envelope with using practical, and maybe some of it was a mixture of animation
Hmm.
and real film. Like there was this one particular part where it looked like they animated a skeleton, and the skeleton fell apart. And thinking now, before I was thinking digital,
Yes.
but now it more than likely was animation or some kind of mixture of it, which I think is pretty cool, because I
Hmm.
can't think of another film from that long ago that would have mixed, or that did mix, actual film with animation. Can you think of something like that?
Uh, to this extent or to this purpose, no. I mean, there's like a great scene of someone's face falling apart, where it's clearly animated, where the face is coming off in pieces like a puzzle, and then there's live photography with fire behind it. But there's definitely mixed media kind of going all the way back to like the Fred Astaire, uh, mouse dancing stuff together back in the 40s or 50s. But to this effect, to show you a you know fucking bonkers horror haunted house film, no way.
Right, right. And for those of you listening who aren't quite sure what we're talking about, so think of like the movie Space Jam, with LeBron James and Looney Tune characters. That's a mixture of, well, digital these days, but in the past it would have been animated characters and live action real movie. That's the kind of combination we're talking about. And that's what we're suggesting was being done here in 1977. And, like you said, I can't think of any other movie that old that was doing that kind of crazy mixture.
Hmm.
All right, and now to your number one for the top 10 of extreme films. What do you have for us?
Yeah, this one also from Japan. I mean, I think Japan has some of the most extreme films ever made. But this one in particular, it's called Tetsuya the Iron Man from 1989. Um, Goes really well with Eraserhead, goes really well with House, goes really well with Boxer's Omen. Just really weird movie, that could only be created by a single individual. This is a story of a man who is slowly turning into metal. He has a giant drill erection. He's, the metal is coming out of his pores, and he's having a complete body horror meltdown. Uh, and it's done in this really great DIY way of like just a filmmaker going out with a 16 millimeter camera and throwing together a bunch of junk to slap on an actor, and it looks amazing. It's in black and white, and it's just very minimal. But then there's these really wild stop motion scenes in the film, that are, there's no real, there is animation, I would say, stop motion animation in it, but a lot of it has to do with like traveling through Tokyo, and it's like this stop motion um, editing style that kind of moves really quickly, and it's just a really strange idea because Tetsuya meets another person who is also a metal fetishist, excuse me. Um, and that person is super into collecting metal and introducing metal into the human body, and it's um, very similar to something like Akira, if you're familiar with that anime. But this is a live action film done on a very small budget, and it's so effective because of how it looks and how it feels. Um, this one's a lot of fun, but it is really trying if you're not into some things that might be grating on your ears, or seeing some um, you know, body mutilation or anything like that. So, but of all the films on this list, this one's got to be the most original.
At first, when I saw this on the list, I was kind of hoping it was the Japanese version of Marvel's Iron Man, but I knew full well it would not be. And I kind of figured, I was like, this is a movie about a man who's turning into iron. And I waited for it, and boom, there it started happening. But you were
Yeah.
absolutely right about one reference you made. I most certainly got the feel of the anime Akira from this, like without a doubt. And for those of you who aren't into anime, Akira is an anime, one of the original OG, like old school animes that really popped off anime culture around the world. And even for some of you who might be into anime, Akira is so old that a lot of people who are into new age anime, they don't go back and watch Akira. And I will say, to me, some of my anime friends would not like me saying this, but Akira is dated. The animation style is dated. And just going back and watching it, it makes you kind of feel like this is old. But it was revolutionary for it at the time. And to see that there was a film, Tetsuya the Iron Man, that kind of mimicked it, I found completely fascinating because, as much as in the anime culture, what Akira was trying to talk about as far as humanity and us progressing forward, it was only an anime culture. An anime culture, especially back in those times in the 90s and 80s, was extremely small. But to see that there was perhaps a live action adjacent or similar movie, it would have had a much wider audience to talk about something very similar in subject nature. So I don't know. That caught me for sure. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, yeah. Just to expound upon that too, like I will save arguing with you about Akira for another day. But I think what we're getting at here is the cinematic representation of cyberpunk, that
Yes.
genre, which is in different forms of media. It's in, especially in literature, and we're talking about like later on films like The Matrix, and but cyberpunk really taking off in Japan with films like Akira and Tetsuya about the changing of the human body through science. And um, Japan is a country that's had a lot of things happen to it, with the atomic bomb being dropped on it, and the I can't remember when it happened, but I think it's after this. But definitely the nuclear um, incident later on, where it was
Oh, Fukushima.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um, that sort of stuff. They have a history of this stuff, but also like through their art, with like their censorship of showing sex in art. So they have like squid introduced so they can get past those sort of censorship things, and just that sort of bleeding into other areas of their arts and exploration of what it is to be human and what it is to interact with our technology. And this is a film that I can't stress enough. Like, if you want to go out there and watch something truly inspired, like someone just went out and they had a crazy idea, this is really it. Like, this is one of those like truly notable films of of vision.
Excellent, excellent, my friend. And that is Gregory Day's top 10 extreme film list. And Gregory Day, I got a few questions for you in your list as
Oh yeah.
always. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And firstly, why do you pick this list? So this is the first list of the year. Why this
Yeah,
one?
I want to come out swinging with a good list, kind of shake things up. I felt like we were a little for the last few lists, a little scholarly, a little educational. So I wanted to get back to those dirty, grimy films for all you genre heads out there, or people who just want something out of the ordinary, and spotlight some weird and strange films.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, we do like to shake things up. And like I always say, I'm a scaredy cat. So I'm not. Some of these maybe. I think Tetsuo the Iron Man. I would see, especially being Akira
Yeah.
adjacent, and I will have that argument with you one day. All right, my
There
friend.
we
And
go.
you also already gave one runner up, but did you have any other films that you you really wanted to include that were maybe hanging on number 10 or number 9, but then just at the end you had to kick them off for something else? You want to give a shout out to a couple films?
Yeah, yeah. There's really it's one title, but there's a original and a remake of it by the same director, called Funny Games. Original German production in '97. Then the director remade it in 2007 with an English cast, and that's a film that explores cinematic violence and why we like cinematic violence and how far are we going to go down the road of exploring our interest in that. So that's a film that you could there. It's just I should say that it's a shot by shot remake of it, so you can either watch one or the other. But yeah, that's a film that struggled to not include on this list.
Interesting pick. Interesting pick. I have not seen it, but you did just make me think about something. Um, about the comparison of, well, you didn't talk about the comparison, but I will, especially leading into a couple questions coming up very soon.
Mhm.
But the idea of, we've talked about some of these films, especially I mentioned that I don't know if some of these films would be released in the US, considering their subject matter. However, as a film culture, as a cinema culture in the US, we most certainly love violence and big guns and shooting people, and like a commando movie, or US forces go in and kill all the bad guys. It seems like cinema culture in the US is perfectly fine with military people shooting up each other. But yet some of these topics and some of these, the gore and the way it's depicted, we might consider that controversial. I find that's an interesting duality. We'll come back to it
Yeah,
though.
I would
Uh,
say that. Yeah, I think violence is inherent in cinema, all around the world. Maybe not in some areas, but yeah, I think specifically just to like on a huge tangent, but I think we're comfortable with certain things. But when I saw Funny Games 2007 in the theater, uh, there were definitely people walking out and shouting and screaming and stuff at the screen. So yeah, there's a comfortability with certain things. I think you hit a vital point there of like watching the military go in and kill some bad guys versus introducing that violence into your living room, which is what Funny Games is getting at.
right, right. To that extent, and these next couple really kind of go off of that, and a little bit go back to your original question I gave you. But when we were messaging back and forth a bit about the list for this show, you mentioned that, and you already just said you wanted to kind of bring it back to what Hipsville AD is all about, to the roots. And it is the beginning of the year, and it's the beginning of a new season for the show. So we have a lot of new listeners out there that aren't familiar with us and what we're doing here. So why don't you take a second and tell us, what is Hipsville AD? Like, where did the name come from, and what do you do with Hipsville?
Yeah, Hipsville AD is my newsletter that I write essays about genre cinema, mostly genre cinema, I should say. I do occasionally break off and talk about other films from around the world or different art movements or um, stuff like that. But mainly the topic is genre cinema. So we're sort of lower level cinema where darker and seedier things blossom, areas where um, artists are tasked with making a movie that's got violence and sex in it, but then they kind of start sneaking in socially aware messages or exploring darker elements of humanity. The name that I chose for this outlet for myself, it comes from a 60s garage rock song by the Sparkles called Hipsville 29 BC. And to me, using that name kind of is talking about how the cool times of cinema is over, and so there's a lot of this is me reflecting on um you know the time when movies were running wild, and because that's just not happening anymore. So to get pleasure out of the cinematic experience, this is where I'm going with that, and talking about remember the time when cinema was cool, and a lot of people aren't aware of that time, and with the way streaming works and the way the big corporations run Hollywood now. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, head over to my Substack, which we'll talk about later at the close of the episode. But that's where you can read all about all these wonderful films.
And I think You're right. You say so much good stuff in there. God, my English, I just can't speak right now. But I think you're right that the age of, and we've mentioned it multiple times throughout this episode, that the age of cinema, and especially mainstream cinema, pushing the envelope to talk about difficult to tackle subject matter, to talk about taboo subjects, to push society to reflect on the nooks and crannies that most people like to ignore. I think you're right. That time's over. Now we have streaming and what is going to cinema only projects that studios know will make money. They have cookie cut projects that say, okay, you have a theme for a movie. Let's put it to this cookie mold, and that way it will sell. Like it's just marketed to make money. And studios don't want to invest a whole lot of money on subject matter that is going to make people uncomfortable because then they won't make money off of it.
Oh yeah.
And because of that, we have lost a lot of the ability of art in the form of cinema being able to push us as a society to question things and to reflect on who we are as a group of human beings. Um, so I think you're absolutely right, and I dig the sentimentality behind what Hipsville AD represents. I dig it. I dig it a lot. And just real quick, so you did say it several times, so I do want to put out a good definition for the good people out there listening at home. When we say genre film, what would be maybe like a quick shorthand definition of what genre film means?
Yeah, genre film is a film that's in any subgenre, whether it's a gangster film or a horror film or even a comedy. But it's really not, to define it, is not a mainstream movie. It's what would be the B movie, the movie that you would be accompanied with your A-list film. So something that's a little seedier, something that's a little low budget, and to this point, breaking taboo, or talking about taboo issues.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, I was talking to someone not long ago, and they said they do love listening to us talk about films, but they said a lot of times they do get lost in some of our vocabulary. So I want to
Okay,
take
okay,
some of our vocabulary and flush it out a little more.
right on.
That way, everyone knows. All right, one last question for you, one that we always come back to with any list, and really it's a two-parter for you though. So, number one, why is this list important to you? So this is distinctly different than, why'd you choose this list, but rather, why is this list important to you? And the follow-up, why should other people view this list as important as well? Take it away.
Mhm. Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. Is that my aim is to spotlight the weird and strange ideas that come out of artists' heads. They come up with these strange ways of communicating things to us. And in these films, not all of them, but some of them that are more on the artier side, are the visions of artists. But why should watch these films? I think it's 90% of movies that come out today, they're boring, and it should be illegal to make boring art or boring entertainment. And so why not go watch a great weird movie, to quote or to misquote John Waters, do something with your life and go see a fucked up movie.
That's interesting. I like that quote. Do something interesting with your life and see a fucked up movie. Indeed, indeed. Well, superb stuff coming at you right there, people. And Gregory Day, before you take off, tell the good people at home where they can find you on the webs and what have you been working on lately?
Yeah. So you can head over to Substack, and you can find me at badday.substack.com. It's where I host and write for HipsvilleAD. And I just kicked off a really long form series that I'm very excited about, that's going to take up most of the first half of the year, called Real Revenge, REEL. So I'm exploring revenge films, and revenge films kind of go through a bunch of different kind of genres, but the revenge film itself is its own like subgenre or subgenre, if you will. And so I'll be exploring how this topic is explored around the world in different movies, and why we like revenge films. And then you can find me at HipsvilleAD on Instagram as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on as always, my friend. It's always a great
Oh
time. And it
yes,
was
sir.
great to do a first year's list with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And that's HipsvilleAD's top 10 list. Check out our friend Gregory Day online. Follow him everywhere, people. And are you interested in writing into the show? Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, myself on LinkedIn. Email us, let your voice be heard. And definitely check out LofiPoliSci.com for all your lo-fi updates out there. Always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Talk to you soon, Lo-Fi listeners. Pickering and Day, signing off.
Adios.